I remember a while ago I went into a job interview and one of the questions was, how long does it take you to edit a podcast? And I went in there thinking, oh geez, how do I sort of play down how long it takes me? Because I think I take too long. So I said, oh, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And they went, oh, that's actually not too bad. This employer had stories of people that he worked with that took 8 to 9 hours to edit something, and they were just completely torched at the end. So, editing is one of those things that can be a real pain in the ass. So, this video might be for you if you're just starting out and you're not sure about what you need to be doing with your podcast. Editing is probably the thing you've heard a lot about. Do I need to be editing my podcast? I could answer that in two different ways. Let's just say you've recorded your podcast, you're happy with it, and the idea of spending ages editing it is really daunting. The question is, do you really need to edit? I think if you're in that stage, and the thing that's stopping you from publishing and getting your stuff out to the world is this giant task of editing that's standing in your way, and you feel like it's just too big of a task to be motivated about, so then you take another 6 months to publish and then you're not making any progress, then maybe editing isn't right for you right now. There are so many more interesting things to learn about with podcasting. Like, editing's really a small portion of it. You know, you've got your branding, you've got your title, you've got your actual production and building of the show, your ability to speak on a mic. There's millions and millions of different things. And if you really feel like you're going to get caught up too much in editing to learn all the other things, then maybe park that. That's okay. If you trust what you've said on the mic and you feel you're confident enough to let other people hear it, go for it. I reckon come back to editing later on when you feel like it's something that's not going to be so daunting. Here's the second answer to that, and this is sort of an answer you would get after you've done that, after you feel like you've done a few episodes, your confidence is up, you're feeling like you're ready to take what you're doing to the next level. Editing's the really easy way to do that, because you can take what you've already got and essentially cut it down into the best possible piece of audio. Because at the end of the day, editing, I think, is really, really important. I think there's a huge difference between you having an active conversation with someone, whether it be on the phone or in person, where you're able to actually talk back to them, and actually passively engaging in a conversation that you can't be a part of directly. You know, when we're part of a conversation ourselves, we're not thinking about what the other person's saying as much as what we want to say next, what their body language is, what's going through our heads, predicting what they might say. When we're in a listening mode only, it's actually much easier to pick up on the inconsistencies of the human voice and the human mind. We stutter a lot. We take a long time to get to the point. We go off on a million different tangents. It's stuff you would never notice in an active conversation, I feel. But when you're just listening and you're just trying to get content and be entertained or informed, that stuff really sticks out. So that's why it's such a really great thing to be able to edit that out. So all you're sharing with your audience is the strongest version of yourself, the strongest version of your idea, and just making an overall better piece of, content for someone. So let's meet in the middle. Let's go, all right, it's really hard to edit an entire podcast to the point where we're cutting ums and ahs and breaths and burps and farts and, not editing it at all. Let's meet in the middle and sort of find something that isn't going to take as much time, but is going to give you some flying hours in editing and improve your product. The first place to look, I think, is in editorial changes. These are really good because AI can't actually replace these, because editorial changes are your personal values, what you want your audience to hear, what you don't want them to hear, and what you think is really interesting and aligns with your values. So let's say, for example, there's 20 minutes of recorded audio that you have there where you're not really feeling it in the interview, you haven't got the energy, it's not as exciting, it might be a bit more boring than you thought. You've shared something a bit personal that you're not confident with sharing with an audience. You've shared something that is, probably ahead of time. You weren't supposed to let your audience know what that is yet. Instead of trying to edit it down over hours and hours and trying to save it, make a cut at the start of the bit you want to get rid of and a cut at the end and put it aside. Just put it on a shelf. That can be, edited later. You could redistribute it at a later date as well as it is. you could just simply poof, it's gone. If you really didn't like it, it doesn't have to be something that exists. That changes how we think about editing. Rather than thinking of it as this nitty gritty thing, it can be something where you make a really broad and critical decision about your content. The other thing you can do in that sense is shift things around, like big building blocks. So let's say, you're in a recording again, your first 20 minutes, you sort of eased into it, and then at the 40-minute mark, you sort of hit this moment in your chat where it's really, really interesting or compelling or funny or inspiring, whatever your genre is. That might be better to be closer to the front or the earlier part of your podcast to keep your audience interested. So again, that's another editorial change, and it also can change your mindset. The linear timeline of your recording does not have to match the timeline that your audience listens to the information you've just given them. But then you want to get into that nitty-gritty thing. So that's cutting out your ums and ahs and your stutters and your pauses and all that kind of stuff. Instead of doing that for the entire edit, which could be an hour-long recording, it does take a long time. Even I'm experienced at it, and it takes me ages. So instead of doing it for the whole hour, do it for the first 5 minutes. Make that first 5 minutes as succinct and to the point and as whippy as you can, because editing down 5 minutes is a much easier task to accomplish than the entire track. And also, that's when you're going to hook your audience in. I personally feel like if I've spent 5 minutes listening to what someone has to say, I've made it that long, I'm probably going to try and listen to the rest and forgive a lot of that stuff as the conversation goes. But where I don't have that forgiveness, a lot of the time is that first 5 minutes. If people aren't getting to what they really want to say to me quickly or efficiently or, the best way possible, that's when I can decide, well, maybe I'll go find another podcast that will. So you've cut those big chunks out that you're not happy with. You've then moved the order around of things if you like, and then you've cut down really fine that first 5 minutes to make it nice and tight. And that, I think, is a really reasonable workload for someone who's either inexperienced at editing, who doesn't have the time to edit, and also doesn't have the $20 a month to get Descript or AI or anything like that, because realistically, they're expensive tools. They're really good, for editing video and getting transcripts. They're a real good all-rounder, but if you don't have the budget, you can absolutely edit yourself within your time and budget constraints, using these methods, and maybe it'll get you a little bit further than trying to do it all yourself or trying to do nothing at all. So start with those small building blocks, and then you can slowly build up to editing more of that finer stuff, later on as you get experienced and develop what you're more passionate about in your podcasting journey. If you're more interested in recording, if you then develop a budget later on and you want to delegate your editing, or you're really, really keen on editing and that's what you decide you want to keep pursuing, then start doing more of that. Just do more of it. But for starters, I think do less.